Ma'am, your stepfather is here. He brought a cutter. I didn't ask why he had my mother's signature. Don't stop him, I said. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. 10 seconds later, the record stopped being private. It became active. My son was asleep on the couch when I ended the call. His math book lay open on his chest pencil, caught between 2 pages like he'd meant to finish and never did. The dishwasher hummed. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Everything was ordinary, stable, paid for. That was the part people mistook for safety. Refusal doesn't feel like power when you say it out loud. It feels like weight you decide to carry without asking anyone else to help. 2 years earlier, my father pressed a sealed envelope into my hand from his hospital bed. The blinds were half closed. Afternoon light cut across the wall in thin stripes. His speech was careful, slow, but clear. If anyone ever tries to open storage unit 317, he said, don't stop them. I remember smiling, trying to reassure him. Strokes do strange things to people. Even your mother, he added. He didn't explain. He didn't soften it. He just watched me until I nodded. That was the last instruction he ever gave me. My father, Thomas Hayes, lived his life in ways people rarely noticed. He was an auditor, quiet, consistent. He left for work at the same time every morning and came home early enough to make dinner with my mother. Growing up, I thought that meant there was nothing to hide. After the funeral, I didn't open the envelope. I didn't tell my mother it existed. I rented a small safety deposit box across town and left it there untouched. Some things only become dangerous once you acknowledge them. Storage Unit 317 sat near the port in Baltimore, tucked between warehouses that smelled like oil and salt water. It wasn't registered under my father's name. It belonged to a shell company that had been dissolved years earlier. It didn't appear in his will. I drove past it once about a year after he died. Gray metal door, no markings, no cameras that stood out. I didn't stop. 2 years later, my mother remarried. Richard Cole. He was introduced as a financial consultant with deep experience. He shook my hand, firmly held eye contact a second too long, and spoke warmly about my father's work. Too warmly. He remembered details no one else did. Old audits. Clients I'd never heard of. Projects my father had supposedly wrapped up years earlier. When I answered vaguely, he watched my face instead of listening. I made sure he learned nothing. My mother liked to say she hated secrets. Families shouldn't hide things from each other, she told me once, tapping her fork against her plate. But secrecy came easily to her when it was useful. She started asking me to sign papers, authorization forms, permissions that would allow Richard to review any remaining undeclared assets connected to my father's estate. When I refused, she didn't argue. She just said calmly, "You care more about the dead than the living." A month later, she had a mild stroke. Not severe enough to panic the doctors, severe enough to justify paperwork. When I arrived at the hospital, Richard was already there, sitting close, too close. He handed me copies of documents I hadn't seen before, medical authority, financial authority, signed by my mother, granted to him. "I'm only helping," he said, "until she recovers." He said it like a favor, like something I should thank him for. That was when I understood the timing, and why my father had waited. The call from the storage facility came at 9:17 p.m. The manager sounded professional but rushed like he'd already decided this wasn't his problem. "Ma'am, your stepfather is here," he said. "He has signed authorization and a cutter." I asked him to repeat it. He did. I told him not to interfere. That night, I opened the envelope for the first time. Inside was a single card with a phone number written in my father's careful handwriting. No name, no explanation. I dialed. The voice on the other end didn't introduce itself. "Has the unit been accessed?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Then remain available," she replied. "And don't intervene." The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen after that phone still in my hand. The refrigerator hummed. The light over the sink flickered once and steadied. This was the part no one ever saw, the waiting. Not fear, not panic, preparation. Storage Unit 317 wasn't valuable because of what it held. It was valuable because of when it would be touched. My father had known that. He'd known pressure applied at the wrong moment made people expose themselves. He'd known silence could be a longer fuse than confrontation. He hadn't told me what was inside. He'd only told me what not to do. When I drove past the port later that night, I didn't slow down. I didn't need to see the door open. I already knew it would be. Cranes moved slowly against the dark water. Everything deliberate, everything waiting. My mother called just before midnight. She didn't ask where I was. "You could have talked to us first," she said. "I was never invited," I replied. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said. "I'm letting it happen." She hung up. An email arrived soon after. No subject line, just a timestamp and a request to remain reachable, nothing else. I didn't respond. I tucked my son into bed when he stirred, pulling the blanket up over his shoulder. He asked if I could stay until he fell asleep. I did. This was the part no one argued about, the cost of stability, the reason boundaries existed at all. When I finally lay down, my phone rested on the nightstand screen dark. Whatever had been sealed for years was no longer dormant. My father hadn't planned revenge. He'd planned inevitability. And somewhere near the water behind a door that had stayed closed for years, something he'd left behind was no longer waiting. It was responding. I understood then why he hadn't stopped anyone himself, why he'd told me not to. Because once the wrong hands reached for it, the rest wouldn't require our consent. And whatever came next would not be a conversation. It would be a process, already in motion. The first thing people do when they realize control is slipping is try to grab it back too fast. That was how I knew it had begun. My mother called at 6:08 the next morning. She didn't say hello. "You knew," she said. "You knew this would happen. I knew you'd sign something eventually," I replied. I didn't know when. Silence followed. Tight. Calculated. "He showed me papers," she said finally. "He said it was routine, just protection." "For who?" I asked. She didn't answer. That pause told me more than any confession could have. By mid-morning, the pressure changed shape. It stopped being emotional and became procedural. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. Calm, neutral. No warmth in it at all. "This is regarding a property matter connected to your late father," the woman said. "Please confirm availability today. No accusation, no explanation, just assumption." I didn't return the call right away. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop closed, watching sunlight move slowly across the floor. The house was quiet. My son was at school. The air smelled like coffee that had gone cold. This was the space where people believed they still had time. They rarely did. Richard emailed me just before noon. No greeting, no subject line. "We need to talk." This has gone further than it should have. That was his first mistake. If something has gone further than it should have, it means you thought you were controlling the distance. I didn't respond. At 12:41 p.m., another email arrived. "Your mother is very upset. You didn't have to escalate things like this." Escalate. As if I had touched anything at all. At 1:17, a third message came through. Shorter, sharper. "This affects more people than you realize." That was the second mistake. People only say that when they start to see how many eyes are turning toward them. I left the house for the first time that day and drove toward the port. Not to the storage unit. Just close enough to feel the environment change. The roads narrowed, buildings flattened. The smell of salt and fuel crept through the vents. Everything near the water looked temporary, even the things that had stood there for decades. Control always feels sturdier from far away. My phone rang while I was parked near a chain-link fence. "Richard again," I answered. "You could have warned us," he said. His voice was steady but strained underneath. "There were better ways to handle this." "I didn't handle anything I said." "You did." "That's not fair," he replied quickly. Your father left things unfinished. We were trying to clean them up. That word arrived right on schedule. Did you read what you signed for? I asked. He exhaled sharply. This isn't the time for technicalities. That was the third mistake. By late afternoon, the tone shifted again. A courier arrived with an envelope, heavy paper, no branding, a return address that didn't invite curiosity. Inside was a single page, a request for presents, not mandatory, but expected. Tomorrow morning. My mother called again that evening. Her voice sounded different now, not angry, careful. They're asking questions, she said. About your father, about his work. I'm sure they are, I replied. You don't understand, she said. They're asking the wrong people. I thought of the phone number on the card, the voice that hadn't asked who I was. I think they're asking exactly who they need to, I said. She hung up. That night, I opened the safety deposit box for the second time since my father died. The envelope lay where I'd left it empty now, just the outline where the card had rested. I didn't replace it. Some instructions only exist to be followed once. When I got home, my answering machine was blinking. Richard again. His voice was steadier than before, but slower. Measured. We should meet, he said, before assumptions get locked in. Locked in. He was running out of softer language. I didn't respond. Instead, I reviewed the calendar for the next day. No confrontation planned, no speeches prepared, just a time, a location, a chair someone expected me to sit in. That's how control really shifts. Not with shouting, with schedules. Before bed, my son asked if I could drive him to school the next morning instead of the bus. Of course, I said. He smiled and went back to his room without another question. I stood in the hallway for a moment after that, listening to the house settle. Pipes ticking, floorboards adjusting. Stability doesn't announce itself. It waits to see if you'll protect it. When I turned off the lights, my phone buzzed. An unknown number, a single line of text. Access confirmed. No signature, no explanation, just confirmation. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back staring at the ceiling. Whatever had been sealed for years was no longer dormant, and whoever thought they still had time had just learned something irreversible. The first reaction had already been recorded, and the next one would cost more. People assume the most dangerous thing in a locked space is whatever someone is trying to steal. They're usually wrong. I didn't go to the storage unit that night. I let that surprise most people later. Instead, I waited. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I already understood the rule my father had built everything around. The wrong moment reveals more than the wrong action. By morning, the calls slowed. That wasn't relief. It was recalculation. Richard stopped emailing. My mother didn't call. Even the unknown numbers went quiet, as if someone had advised everyone to pause and get aligned. That was when I knew they were talking to each other. The first official request arrived before noon. Not dramatic, not threatening. A calendar invite. No subject line, just a location near the harbor, and a time slot marked tentative. Tentative meant they expected me to comply without being ordered. I drove down later that afternoon. Not to attend anything, just to see the place. Storage units all look the same until you're close enough to notice the details, the way some locks are newer than others, which doors have been repainted, which numbers are slightly crooked. Unit 317 sat between two others that had clearly been accessed recently. Its door was cleaner, untouched. That detail mattered. The manager recognized me immediately. He didn't smile. "You didn't tell me what was in there," he said. "I didn't know myself," I replied. That wasn't entirely true. I knew what wasn't in there. He hesitated before continuing. They didn't take anything he said. They mostly looked. "Did they open boxes?" I asked. "Yes." "Did they photograph anything?" He nodded. "A lot." That was when I understood my father's restraint. You don't set a trap with valuables. You set it with records. I didn't step inside. I didn't need to. Just knowing what kind of attention the unit had drawn was enough. If there had been money, Richard would have moved faster. If there had been jewelry, it would have disappeared. But records make people nervous. Records make them pause. My phone rang as I was leaving. This time it wasn't Richard. It was my mother. Her voice sounded rehearsed. "We need to clarify some things," she said. "There are misunderstandings about what I asked. Your father's work," she replied. "About what he kept. Kept, not left behind. Kept." "You always said you hated secrets," I said. "I hate unnecessary ones," she replied quickly. That was the line. That was when I knew she'd seen enough to understand the danger, but not enough to know the scope. That evening I received another message. Not a call, not an email, a document request. Informal, polite, carefully worded. They wanted confirmation that I had never accessed the contents of Unit 317. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the safety deposit box again. Not to retrieve anything, just to confirm it was empty. It was. My father had planned it that way. No duplicates in my possession. No leverage I could misuse. Only a sequence of actions that couldn't be undone once triggered. That night Richard finally called again. He didn't waste time. "You should come see what's in there," he said, "before assumptions get cemented." "Why?" I asked. "So you can understand what you're protecting," he replied. Protecting. He still believed I was guarding something. "I'm not protecting anything," I said. "I'm respecting timing." He went quiet, not confused, alarmed. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "You don't know what this could do to people," he said. That was the first honest sentence he'd said since all this began. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen and watched the light outside fade. The house felt smaller than it had the night before. Not unsafe. Just exposed. That's what happens when other people realize you're not acting emotionally. They stop knowing how to predict you. Late that night, another text arrived from the unknown number. Preliminary review underway. No details, no reassurance. Just movement. I thought of my father then not as he'd been in the hospital, but as he'd been when I was a child. Patient, observant, never rushing. He'd understood something I was only beginning to see clearly now. Power isn't about possession. It's about sequence. By the time I went to bed, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was inside Unit 317 was never meant to be claimed. It was meant to be touched once. By the wrong hands. At the wrong time. So that the people who reached for it would explain themselves without being asked. And somewhere between the port and whatever office had started that preliminary review, someone was already realizing they'd looked too closely and far too late. The first real confession didn't come from Richard. It came from my mother. She showed up at my house without calling first. It was late afternoon. My son was still at school. The light in the kitchen had shifted softer now, catching the dust in the air. She stood in the doorway longer than necessary, purse still on her shoulder, like she wasn't sure whether stepping inside meant agreeing to something she couldn't undo. "You shouldn't have let this go so far," she said. "I didn't let anything go," I replied. "I stayed out of it." She moved into the kitchen, setting her purse down carefully like placement mattered. "They're asking questions," she said. "Serious ones." "I assumed they would," I said. She sat at the table and folded her hands. "They know about the unit," she said. "They know your father kept records." "That doesn't surprise me," I said. Her fingers tightened slightly. "They know I signed things," she added. That was the first crack. Signed what I asked." She looked up at me, then eyes sharp defensive. "Not what you think," she said quickly. "I never stole anything. I never took money. I didn't accuse you of that," I said. Silence followed. It stretched longer than either of us expected. "They're acting like I knew," she said finally. "Did you?" I asked. She exhaled slowly through her nose the way she always had when she was choosing words carefully. I knew enough, she said. Enough was worse than nothing. She began explaining then, not in a rush, not emotionally, like someone laying out steps they'd rehearsed privately for years. She said my father had come to her once long before he got sick, that he'd told her there were problems at work, that certain people were moving money through places they shouldn't. He said it wasn't my concern, she said, that he'd handle it. And you believed him, I asked. She hesitated. I believed it would stay contained, she said. Ma, that was when Richard entered the story. Not as a husband, as a connection. She said they'd known each other years earlier, that he'd been curious about my father's work, that he asked questions she didn't always answer. I never meant for it to become personal, she said. But it did, I said. She didn't deny it. What did you sign? I asked. She looked down at the table. There were forms, she said. Statements, confirmations, confirming what I pressed. That certain materials had been reviewed, she said. That they'd been handled appropriately. My stomach tightened. By whom, I asked. She swallowed. By your father, she said. And by me. That was the moment everything rearranged itself. Not loudly, cleanly. My father hadn't been protecting strangers. He'd been protecting us. They're saying my signature matters, she continued. That it connects things. Of course it does, I said. You made it official. She looked up sharply. You don't understand, she said. I was trying to keep the family safe, from what I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, then flipped it face down without reading. They're talking about federal involvement, she said quietly. About obstruction. I said nothing. That was when she realized I wasn't going to intervene. You could explain, she said. You could tell them you didn't know, that you weren't involved. That would be lying, I said. She stared at me. For once I added the record doesn't need my voice. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. You think this is some kind of victory, she said. No, I replied. I think this is consequence. She grabbed her purse hands, shaking now. He planned this, she said. Your father planned to ruin us. He planned for the truth to surface if anyone touched what wasn't theirs, I said. You chose to touch it. Bah, that was when Richard called. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. I didn't hear his words, only her reactions. No, she said. Yes, I told her. I don't know what else you want me to do. Then her voice dropped. Because they're asking about me. She ended the call and looked at me with something close to panic. He says you're letting this happen on purpose, she said. I am, I replied. She left without saying goodbye. The door closed softly behind her. That evening, an email arrived from an address I hadn't seen before. It contained no greeting, just an attachment, a scanned document. My father's name appeared at the top, Richard's near the bottom, and my mother's signature, clear and unmistakable, placed beside a line marked Witness. I didn't need to read the rest. That was the trap, not the unit, not the records, the assumption that family loyalty would override documentation. Later that night, another message arrived. Short, direct, Federal review initiated. No emotion, no commentary, just fact. I sat at the kitchen table long after the house had gone quiet. My son asleep. The lights dimmed. The day settling into memory. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice in the way movies framed it. It was exposure. And exposure doesn't choose sides. It reads what was signed. It checks dates. It follows sequence. My father hadn't left the records to accuse anyone. He'd left them so that when pressure came, the people closest to him would explain themselves without being asked. And now they were, one line at a time, on paper, where it would stay. Richard stopped calling after the email arrived. That was how I knew it was serious. For days before that, he'd been relentless. Missed calls, Voicemails that sounded calm on the surface but rushed underneath like he was trying to speak before something caught up with him. After the Federal Review notice, nothing. Silence wasn't relief. It was calculation. My mother called instead. Twice the next morning. Once more in the afternoon. I didn't answer. By evening she left a voicemail. Her voice didn't sound angry anymore. It sounded careful. "Eleanor," she said, using my full name the way she did when she wanted something to feel official. "We need to talk. This has gone further than anyone expected." That line stuck with me. Anyone, not me. The next contact didn't come from family. It came from a number labeled unknown. "Ms. Hayes," a man said when I answered. His voice was neutral, practiced. "This is Special Agent Lowell with the Financial Records Division. We'd like to speak with you." About what I asked. "Your father's materials," he replied, "and the circumstances under which they were accessed." "I didn't access anything," I said. "We know," he replied. "That's why we're calling." We met 2 days later in a small office that smelled faintly like old carpet and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Agent Lowell didn't rush. He laid a thin folder on the table between us and didn't open it right away. "Your father understood timing," he said. "That's unusual. I think he understood people," I replied. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile. Recognition. He finally opened the folder. Inside were copies. Not originals. Forms, logs, cross-referenced signatures. "You know your mother's name appears here more than once," he said. "Yes," I said. "You also know your stepfather's involvement predates their marriage," he continued. "I suspected as much," I replied. He nodded, satisfied that we were aligned on reality. "What you may not know," he said, tapping the folder lightly, "is that once those records were physically accessed, the case changed." How, I asked. "It moved from passive retention to active interference," he said. "That's not about intent. That's about sequence. Sequence again. My father's favorite word." When Richard entered the unit, the agent continued. He didn't just expose himself. He exposed anyone connected through authorization or prior acknowledgement. "My mother," I said. "Yes," he replied, "especially as a witness." I sat back in my chair. "So that's why she's panicking," I said. Agent Lowell didn't correct me. When I got home, my mother was waiting in the driveway. She stepped out of her car before I'd even turned off the engine. "You met with them," she said. "I did," I replied. "They're making it sound criminal," she said, "like I intended something." "What did you intend?" I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I intended to keep things stable," she said. "By signing documents you didn't read?" I asked. "I trusted your father," she snapped. "And later I trusted Richard." "That's not stability," I said. "That's delegation." She followed me inside without asking. The house was quiet. Late afternoon light stretched across the floor. "They asked about your role," she said. "Why you didn't intervene. I wasn't required to," I replied. "You could have," she insisted. "Yes," I said. "And you could have not signed." She paced the kitchen, hands restless. "Richard says this can still be contained," she said. "That there are options." "That's interesting," I said. "Because the agent I spoke with used a different word." She stopped. "What word?" she asked. "Inevitable," I said. That night Richard finally called. Not me, my lawyer. She forwarded the message without commentary. "We need to discuss potential exposure. Eleanor has materials that could be misunderstood." Misunderstood. That was new. The next escalation came faster than I expected. A courier arrived at my office with a thick envelope. Inside was a formal request. Not a subpoena, not yet. A notice of interest. It listed names: my father, Richard, Margaret Hayes, and at the bottom, Eleanor Hayes, custodian of relevant records. Custodian, not participant, not suspect. Position mattered. My father had been right. My mother called again that night. This time she didn't accuse. She pleaded. You don't understand what this could cost, she said. I understand exactly, I replied. It could ruin everything, she said. Reputations, futures, only the ones built on signatures, I said. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Richard is angry with you, she said. I almost laughed. That's not leverage, I replied. That's information. The next day, the panic became visible. Richard's firm quietly removed his profile from their website. A mutual contact mentioned he'd taken leave. Another said his accounts were being reviewed. No announcements, just subtraction. Late that evening, my lawyer called. They're circling, she said. Not you. Each other. Good, I replied. There's something else, she added. Your mother's asking about medical authority. I closed my eyes. She wants to revise it, my lawyer continued, before anything formal happens. And I asked. And the timing is terrible, she said. It looks reactive, the opposite of controlled. The final moment of the week came quietly. An email from Agent Lowell. 3 lines. Next phase approved. Expanded review initiated. You may be contacted again. No warning, no reassurance, just progression. I sat at the kitchen table that night, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. My father had known this part too. The moment when denial collapses and people stop defending what they did and start defending why they did it. That's when mistakes multiply. That's when panic speaks. And that's when the truth stops needing protection. Because once the system starts asking how instead of if someone always talks, the only question left was who would talk first and who they would try to blame when they did. The first person to break wasn't Richard. It was my mother. She showed up unannounced the morning after the expanded review notice. No call, no warning, just her car in front of my house before I'd finished my coffee. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not older, just compressed like someone who had been holding tension too long and finally lost the strength to keep it hidden. We need to decide what we're saying, she said the moment I opened the door. Not what happened. What we were saying. I'm not deciding anything, I replied. I already told the truth. That's not enough anymore, she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. They're asking questions in a certain order. That matters. I closed the door behind her. Questions always matter, I said. That's why your answers shouldn't change. She sat at the kitchen table like it still belonged to her. They asked me when I first knew about the documents, she said. I told them I didn't. That Richard handled everything. And did he? I asked. She hesitated. Just long enough. They showed me copies, she said quietly, with my signature. Older than I remembered. Witness signatures don't expire, I said. She flinched at that. They think your father planned this, she continued, that he expected someone to cross a line. He did, I replied. That's not fair, she said sharply. He never told me. That was the point, I said. He didn't want consent. He wanted confirmation. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. Richard says if we present a united front, this can still be framed as a misunderstanding, she said. United fronts collapse under documentation, I replied. She looked up at me, then eyes sharp with something close to anger. You're enjoying this, she said. No, I replied. I'm enduring it. That afternoon my lawyer called. They're scheduling formal interviews, she said. Individually. Of course they are, I replied. They asked whether you'd be willing to submit a written statement, she continued. Do they need one, I asked. No, she said, but offering one reinforces your position. Which is, I asked. That you never intervened, she said, because you were never obligated. The statement took me less than 20 minutes to write. No emotion, no speculation, just dates, actions, absences. When I finished, my lawyer read it twice. This is clean, she said. Almost clinical. That's how records survive, I replied. Richard's interview was scheduled the next day. I didn't attend. But I didn't need to. I heard about it anyway. He arrived late, brought notes, requested clarifications before answering basic questions. The kind of behavior that reads like preparation when you think you're smarter than the process. By evening, his lawyer had called mine. "We believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding access authority," the man said. Mr. Cole acted in good faith. In good faith, my lawyer replied evenly with a bolt cutter. Silence. Then, that detail is under review. The next escalation came from an unexpected place. The storage facility manager called me directly. "They're asking for internal footage," he said, "from the night your stepfather accessed the unit." "Do you have it?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "But there's something you should know." I waited. He didn't hesitate, the manager said. Didn't argue, didn't ask questions, just cut and stepped inside, like he'd been rehearsing. That night my mother texted me. Not a call, a message. "Richard says if you'd spoken up sooner, none of this would have happened." I stared at it for a long moment, then replied, "He's wrong." That was all. The following morning, another email arrived from Agent Lowell. Subject line, clarification request. They wanted confirmation of one thing, whether my father had ever discussed why the unit existed. I answered truthfully. He told me not to stop anyone who tried to access it. No explanation, no elaboration. The response came less than an hour later. Understood. One word. Enough. By the end of the week, the tone changed. No more polite phrasing, no more tentative language. Documents arrived with headers. Interview times were no longer suggestions. Someone had crossed from inquiry into case. Richard's firm made it official. Administrative leave. Temporary, they said. Indefinite in practice. My mother stopped calling after that. Not because she was finished. Because she was deciding which version of herself would survive this. The final moment came late Friday afternoon. A sealed envelope delivered to my lawyer's office. Inside was a preliminary determination. No conclusions yet. But one line stood out. Custodial authority regarding Margaret Hayes's medical and financial decisions may require reassessment pending outcome. Reassessment. I read it twice, then once more. My father hadn't just protected records. He'd protected sequence. He'd made sure that when the truth surfaced, it would do so in a way that forced everyone involved to choose between loyalty and accuracy, between family and signature. And now that choice was imminent. Because once authority gets questioned, someone always tries to grab it before it's formally taken away. The only thing left to see was who would move first when panic finally outweighed pride. The reassessment didn't arrive loudly. There was no confrontation, no urgent call, just a shift in who stopped being consulted. I realized it the morning my mother missed a scheduled interview, not postponed, not rescheduled, missed. Agent Lowell mentioned it casually when he called. She wasn't cleared to attend alone, he said. Her counsel advised delay. Cleared by whom I asked. By us, he replied. That was the moment authority moved quietly without ceremony. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called. They've initiated a temporary transfer, she said. Medical and financial decision-making. To whom I asked. A pause. To you, she replied. Not permanent, not yet, but immediate. I didn't feel relief. I felt weight. The kind that settles in your chest when you realize you're no longer observing consequences, you're administering them. My mother called that evening. Her voice was different. Not defensive, not angry, measured. They say I need your approval now, she said. Yes, I replied. For how long, she asked. That depends on what surfaces next, I said. She didn't argue. That told me everything. Richard tried one last time. Not directly, through an intermediary, a message delivered carefully stripped of tone. Richard Cole wishes to clarify intent and regrets any misinterpretation. Misinterpretation. The final refuge. Agent Lowell didn't wait long after that. They executed retrieval. Not seizure, retrieval. The distinction mattered. Federal agents arrived at the storage facility with paperwork already signed. No cutters this time, just keys. I wasn't there when it happened, but I saw the footage later. Richard standing too close. My mother watching from the car. No one speaking. Silence does strange things when it's recorded. Inside Unit 317, they found exactly what my father had cataloged. Original audit copies. Cross-referenced transactions. Signatures that didn't age well, including one my mother stopped looking at halfway through. Richard was taken aside first. Not arrested, separated, interviewed. He asked for water 3 times in 15 minutes. That detail stayed with me. My mother wasn't handcuffed. She wasn't questioned aggressively. She was informed that her status had changed, that she was now considered cooperative rather than peripheral. Words matter, especially when they start replacing others. The call I'll never forget came that night. Not from my mother, from Agent Lowell. "Your father didn't leave money," he said. "He left position." I didn't respond. He didn't expect one. The offer followed days later. Consultative access, temporary, conditional. I accepted. Not because I wanted proximity to power, but because refusing would have looked like avoidance. And I was done avoiding. Richard resigned before anything formal was filed. It was framed as personal, health-related. No one corrected the narrative publicly. They never do. My mother asked to see me once more, in person. I agreed. She sat across from me, hands folded, eyes tired. "I never thought it would come to this," she said. "I did," I replied. She nodded slowly. "That's the difference," she said. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't apologize. She asked something smaller. "Will you keep this quiet?" she asked. "I'll keep it accurate," I said. She closed her eyes. That answer hurt more than anger ever could. The case didn't explode. It resolved. Slowly. Procedurally. Without spectacle. Which was exactly how my father had designed it. On my last visit to the harbor unit, 317 was already resealed. A new lock. A federal notice affixed to the door. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. Some people inherit assets. Others inherit silence. I inherited leverage. Not to destroy, not to retaliate, but to decide when something ends. As I walked away, my phone vibrated. A single message from my lawyer. All records secured. File closed. Closed. Not buried. Not erased. Just finished. I thought of my father then, not as a victim, not as a secret keeper, but as a man who understood that betrayal doesn't end when it's exposed. It ends when the wrong people lose the ability to decide what happens next, and this time they weren't the ones holding the pen.